us who are alive today, it's a hard-fought challenge for us to maintain freedom and democracy in our country. Thanks for your comments, Mr. Kola. We will certainly talk to you, I know, before we wrap up around 5:45. Looking forward to your response to some of the comments that will come through. So, as I mentioned earlier on, we also have a panel that we're going to talk to, and I've got 3 speakers as part of the panel. Advocate Sipho Matulo, the acting chairperson of the Social Cohesion Advocates Program. We have Kolelwa Kashe Katia, who's the project leader at the Ilula Miti Essay Scenarios, and then we also have from the South African Human Rights Commission, Commissioner Nomaklubi Queenana. So thanks to once again to all 3 of you. Now I've spoken to you already, Advocate Matula, perhaps on the Human Rights Commission side, how would you respond to my question to you to say 30 years of freedom, 30 years of democracy, how does the SA Human Rights Commission internalize that statement in terms of the ultimate protection of human rights for the people of our country?
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's on.
I think just check. Okay.
Okay, maybe let me use this one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashton. So, as the South African Human Rights Commission, we are saying that indeed strides have been made with regard to achieving or realizing human rights being inalienable, human rights in South Africa being guaranteed in the Constitution. And we realize that it is important to say that we must celebrate our 30 years of democracy, having a constitution that has been termed the best in the world. You know, I think we are like number 3, if I'm correct, in terms of our constitution. Well written, well thought, almost all the rights are guaranteed. But the truth is there's still work to be done. When one looks at basic human rights that are currently being violated, amongst others, one can just mention the issue of water, which as the Commission, we are almost at a stage to say that it looks like it might be a national crisis, because most areas really are struggling where it is concerned. The right to sanitation, you know, just the other day I had to travel to an area called Murukwe in Northwest, and they're still using latrines. Children did not have water. Children had to defecate in the bushes. It was really bad. And it was a sad story of events to know that whilst in Gauteng, people are experiencing these human rights, and we still have areas where people are saying, what human rights? So it is a call that we said as a commission we really need to take forward in terms of assisting by calling the stakeholders to come in account what has gone wrong, because we realize that it is definitely a systemic issue. A lot of our stakeholders are just not accounting, and I was very happy to meet with the MEC of Education in Northwest, who was saying, in fact, they are aware that problems are definitely there, and it's time as government to say consequential, management needs to be applied, even in public sectors.
But therefore, if I may say this, can we say, as you had said earlier on, that in terms of South African law constitution, South Africa is up there with regard to human rights, and that's where you fit in. That the practical expression of the Constitution in terms of protecting our human beings has had such shortfalls that in fact we are consistently practicing actions of human wrongs as opposed to human rights.
What I will say to you is something is definitely being done. But enough, maybe that is the question to ask. But truth be told is that we do see in other areas where human rights are being observed, but at the same time, we do also see situations where there's violation. And all sorts of violation. In schools, you find that labor rights are really not being observed in terms of the teaching environment. For the teachers, it's impossible for them to even have a proper learning environment for these students. So clearly there, one says there's a violation of that basic human right, the right to education, the right for that child to be able to access education. We are told we are in the new dispensation in terms of technology, but for some areas in our country, especially the rural areas, it's a thought, it's an idea yet to be realized.
Yeah, and therefore, understandably, some people question, therefore, that physical expression of what freedom are we talking about if we don't have some of those basic things. We're not talking about fancy things, but those basic things. Let me do this with bringing the third of the panelists, Kolewa Kashe Katia, who's from the Indulamiti SA scenarios. Now, where you fit in, right? You map out scenarios, right? So if you can internalize freedom for South Africa, freedom at 30, democracy at 30.
Thank you, Ashraf, and thanks to the department for this invitation. For us, as people build scenarios, as you know, scenarios inform long-term thinking, of a country. And it was important for us to continue with the tradition, and I'm saying it's a tradition of scenarios building because this democracy that we're in was actually also informed by a process of building scenarios with the Montclair scenarios of the 1990s. So the utility of our work right now, especially when it comes to these 30 years of democracy, is to look back, in particular using the scenarios. What was it that was imagined?
Long before
1994 came about, how we imagined the trajectory of the country. And various storylines were written the way in the Nationalist Party could have just decided to play ostrich and pretend like nothing wrong is going on. Or we could have the flight of the flamingos wherein the nation is thriving. And over the years, several other scenarios building exercises have taken place. And when we look at those now, when we look backwards, we've seen a trend wherein the worst case scenario seems to be emerging. And by the time we started our work as Indulamiti 5 years ago, it was at a critical point wherein students had spilled out onto the streets. It was the tail end of Fees Must Fall. There was a Zuma Must Fall, there was this Must Fall, and so on. So we felt that once again, it was an opportune moment to build scenarios. And it still continues, that trajectory of us going, or slipping rather, into the worst case scenario. Even with our own scenarios, we found that the key drivers were inequality. Yes, the minister has spoken to how we've eradicated inequality in terms of race. However, we still have inequality in terms of class. We have inequality in terms of spatial arrangements. There are those who are still trapped in the townships or in the rural areas who don't receive those basic services that the commissioner was speaking to. We have gender inequality. And now, recently, what we found is that there's age inequality, where young people are so disadvantaged in our country. And so, for us, it is important to monitor and not just celebrate. As much as we're looking back and celebrating, we need to quantify what it is that we set out to attain. For example, there was the RDP, when the democracy was imagined, but also at the same time, the Constitution was written with all its aspirations, but there was also, within the RDP project, there was the RDP of the soul, which was supposed to be linked to the TRC recommendations, where there was truth-telling, where we expected that there would be reparation, or there would be a process wherein there is justice in terms of correcting, or everything that happened, in our horrific past. But what we've seen is that that is not happening, and as a result, it's leading to resentment. And now there's also resistance, wherein others who've got this unearned privilege are resisting, any efforts towards reconciliation. And at the same time, young people in particular are feeling so dislocated and so disengaged that there is no effective inclusion of young people in this conversation. And for us, that is a risk. And when we looked at our recent results of which way we're going, we found that once again, we were in the worst case scenario, but what is even frightening is that during COVID, we found ourselves in a scenario, entering a scenario that's even worse than what we wrote in 2018. And I think that's quite scary, wherein we find ourselves in a state of lawlessness, with ruptures everywhere, violent crime, violent protests, and so on. And also those, you have to understand where the people are coming from, because there's a feeling of disappointment.
Well, I think you raised some really important issues in terms of where you fit in terms of scenario planning. Your point is really valid, which is, do we celebrate Freedom Day? Do we commemorate Freedom Day? Or should it annually be a checklist on the state of our freedom, right? So for example, now let's say we have the minister in your presence here. He says, give me an update in terms of your scenarios and how it impacts on our freedom. Would you tell him, therefore, that in fact South Africa's freedom, that means the ability of each one to express ourselves to the maximum potential, that's my understanding of it all, is on track, or in fact is being constantly undermined by a variety of forces?
I think our Constitution is the one North Star that we still have, but it's also at risk, because now with the recent scenarios that we are building and soon to be launching, what we found is that even those Chapter 9 institutions that are informed by the Constitution itself, as much as we have the freedom of expression, there's media freedoms, students, we've doubled the number of students that can enter universities, but as long as institutions now are being undermined due to a lack of accountability, then they are also at risk, and that's one of the key drivers now in the current scenarios, that we're finding that there's reduced accountability.
So when they undermine, then freedom runs the risk of being undermined.
It runs the risk.
And democracy.
And even the Constitution itself.
Yeah. Let me bring in Advocate today. You're itching to say something, I know. Go ahead.
No, what Ashraf, what Tolima is raising, I wanted to add that one of our challenges also is that we have another sector that we might have left, which the minister is even heading. The agriculture community also, it is getting angry all the time. Academics also, the young people who are living in this country to go and learn outside. The third part is what the minister raised on the issue of race. And I think in the morning, when he was raising that, our freedom was also supported by the frontline states. I think that's one aspect we should bring, that our liberation democracy project started first with liberation. I don't think we were fighting for democracy first. There was this concept of liberation, freedom of the mind, freedom of the soul. But when you look back, this month of April is important in the whole continent. Many African countries celebrate Freedom Month. Freedom Day as independence. But dependency syndrome also crept in. Hence, after 1994, we had to take a lot of baggage and luggage of neighboring countries coming to this country. And we have to maintain that.
But here's a quick one, and we've got 30 seconds for news now, right? In terms of where you fit in or sit in with social cohesion, right? Is our society not that cohesive anymore, and therefore that once again undermines freedom and democracy? We've got 30 seconds.
I think what undermines it is what I said again. Challenges of inequality, poverty, unemployment. As the promises and manifestos come and go, people are starting to lose faith. And that's where collective leadership is very important. Community accountability, leadership accountability. Everybody must take part in the building of any nation. I don't think we should relegate it to the state alone. We should bring everybody into this national dialogue, into this endeavor, to say, how do you rescue this continent that was colonized for more than 300 years? It is the same like this country. So Ashraf, I'll say to you, even during apartheid, there was no social cohesion. Only after 1994 that we are talking about the nation-building concept. And
the mobilization may have taken place there. I'm going to stop you all because it's use now, but as you talk about, what's right for the continent, what's right for the country, I'm going to suggest, rather skeptically, people listening to me now, and we have many people that have an eye on the natural parts of the country, they'll say, forget about the country and the continent, fix my community, just fix my little village, because that's where the problem arises. Keep it on hold, think about it, let's get the news now, it's 5 o'clock.
stories is how Zuma to stand for elections this year and Western Cape schools to reopen tomorrow. Very good afternoon. We start with election news with the MK Party's appeal against the IEC's decision to uphold the objection against former President Jacob Zuma's candidacy has been successful. The Electoral Court has dismissed the objection. No order has been made as to the costs.
Former President Jacob Zuma will appear on the MK Party's candidates list. The party, through its legal counsel, yesterday argued in the Electoral Court that the Commission acted outside of its jurisdiction when it upheld the objection in terms of Section 47, subsection 1e of the Constitution that deemed Zuma ineligible to stand for public office due to his 2021 conviction of contempt of court. Advocates Dunham also further charged that the remission of sentence granted to the former president by his successor, President Cyril Ramaphosa, means that the ultimate sentence meted out against Zuma is 3 months. The specialist court forming the reasons available at a later stage. Zoneka Kardashian, SABC News, Johannesburg.
ANC Chairperson Gweleman Dashe says the governing party will do well in KZN in the upcoming elections. However, he has refused to be drawn on the percentage he thinks that the party will attain at the May 29 polls. This has experts are predicting that the newly formed MK party may result in the ANC dropping below 50% at the polls. And Dashe spoke to our news desk today.
I can tell you somewhere, putting my neck on the floor. We won't good results in KZN. And the most troublesome party to us will be the MP, not the MK. MK is a spoiler. So, a spoiler is a problem if it takes from you. But if it takes from everybody else, even those who celebrate, get shocked when by elections come. Well, they thought that people move from those parties to the MK party.
ANC MP Boy Mamabolo says that he will try to secure a new court date before the elections after his urgent application was struck off the roll by the High Court in Joburg this morning. Mamabolo took the ANC to court over the removal of his name from the candidate list. He had hoped to challenge the ANC's decision to adjust his position on the party's 2024 list, seeking reinstatement to his original ranking ahead of the polls. Mamabolo says we will continue supporting the ANC.
Well, I welcome the contention that the matter is not agent, just want to expose individuals who chairman of the list was saying this was the ANC, with the will of the branches of the ANC. No one can talk about the will of the branches of the ANC. On election campaign, yes, we are going to campaign for the ANC and our organization.
The Western Cape Education Department says all schools across the province will reopen tomorrow after being closed due to adverse weather. The province's Education Minister David Mania says they have received reports of 144 schools that have been damaged due to gale force winds and heavy rainfall. He says repair work to some of the schools has already started. And nearly 100 people have now been evacuated from southern Russia and Kazakhstan because of floods described as the worst in decades. The Ural River has burst through embankments and more residents have been told to leave their homes. The BBC's Paul Moss.
The words of one Russian regional governor say it all. Praise God and flee from your homes. Vadim Shunkov was speaking as the city of Kurgan became the latest to come under threat from flooding. Orsk to the southwest is already underwater, while across the border in Kazakhstan, 5 regions are in a state of emergency. Early snowmelt in Siberia and the Ural Mountains has been blamed, but angry protesters in Orsk complained that local officials hadn't done enough to help.
The top story at 5 o'clock, the MK Party's appeal against the IEC decision to uphold the objection against former President Jacob Zuma's candidacy has been successful. For SAFM News,
and coming up in your sports this hour, we hear from Amanda Lamini, who says that Banyana will have to fight a psychological battle to bounce back. Kakani is another significant milestone and a Rugby Club World Cup set to start in 2028. More details at 5:30.
Got Flooring, the Candy Crash on Victoria's M1 South, just before you get to the M4 ambulance, only short time go lanes were closed to recover that, to pull that out of the embankment and get that tank around the way. It leads to big backlog from Port Partnership, having dropped to back on Bapto or heading it to Pumalani Plaza or Durable Plaza in North Victoria. We'll get an alternative very soon for you.
The country, just shut up. Don't say too much about our leadership. Just don't say that. South Africa, you can tweet it out, you can call him on talk shows, you can do it once. We must value that. But here's the thing, you can also vote. And political parties, sometimes you get countries where there's just one party and they say vote for the leader. We don't have that. We've got so many parties which reflects our ability to express ourselves. So for that we have to pay tribute to the freedom fighters that brought freedom to our country across the political spectrum that gave us freedom in 1994. I think it must be cherished and it's really important. Now, having said that, right, the Constitution and our wonderful Constitution and the right to vote, right, clearly is not enough if it doesn't translate into, to borrow the phrase of a political party, into a better life for all, right? If it doesn't translate into that, and stats essays are on the border from us, I see. I mean, they can come up with numbers, you can come up with your scenarios. There's so much evidence that South Africans are struggling. If we have 10 things to tick on, there's maybe 3 we're getting right and 7 we're getting wrong, from education to hospitals to healthcare, to our roads, to security. I mean, there's just so much. So I'm saying to you, therefore, we shouldn't even have that discussion today, because that's clear. The big question is like, what now? What should the citizens of our country do to protect democracy, to protect our freedom, to ensure that we actually live the good life that we want to live?
Well, I like the fact that you're linking that up with the right to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, obviously our constitution in terms of section is 19.3 guarantees us that right to vote. And rightly pointed out by the minister, that is one right I say we are equal when it comes to it. But as for the rest, we are definitely not equal. So as for socio-economic rights, as Africans, I don't think we have that. The inequalities are right there. Now, even when you go towards issues of women, now gender inequalities also, they keep showing their ugly head every time. I can just tell you that legal practitioners, women legal practitioners only were pronounced to be human beings 100 years ago. This year we'll be celebrating 101 years. That tells you something. So there's a lot that will still need to be done. But I would say South Africans need to go to the polls. They need to read the manifestos and understand them in order for them to be able to choose right with regard to whichever party that they think is going to be able to take them forward. But having said that, let's also put leaders that are willing to adhere to the very constitution and all the laws that we have in our country in order to be able to take democracy forward. If we are going to have people that are susceptible to be corrupt or that are just not willing to recognize our laws, then we are definitely in trouble.
Mm-hmm. But I'm going to suggest to you that when it comes to the manifestos, if I ask this room here, how many people have read the manifestos of 10 parties? I think you're going to struggle to get 2 hands put up, right? I'm suggesting that the world is into sound bites. We don't want a full-on, I'm not saying they must have a manifesto. They must put them down into 10-point plans on a piece of paper and say, that's the 10 points that we believe in, finished, everybody will get that. If they want to tweet it out, it's a bit easier. That's really what I'm saying. But here's the point that I want to put to you, right? That you made the point about the right to vote, quite rightly so. It's imminent because there's an election coming up. But my question is that right to vote and the right to exercise that vote, and then when we do exercise, is that enough to shift the problems we have in the country? Because I'm suggesting it's not enough. Something more must be done, because you may have the ruling party in power, you may have the ruling party in coalition in power, you may have a new party, we don't know, right? But whichever, that's government.
Yeah.
They're going to talk about, give us 5 years, give us 10 years, we don't have the time. So what more should be done and can be done besides exercising the vote? So beyond the vote, what?
Well, but of course, I must still say that as for the right, it must be exercised. Just talking to young people as they are sitting here in this room, it's important that they must realize that right. They must exercise that right. That's one right that was hard-earned, blood was shed in order for that right to be realized. So that is the cornerstone of our democracy. That's where we need to start. And yes, the other rights, they're also guaranteed in the Constitution, but we need to fight further in order to realize them. In terms of us being equal, in terms of all the resources to be shared. In the Commission, what we have done, we have now come up with a focus area that's called pro-poor budgeting, because we have realized that the inequalities, they continue to exist, because when you look at the different communities, they are definitely not the same in terms of the haves and the haves not. And if we don't address that aspect to make sure that the young people, as they finish school, they've got opportunities for them to go and work, if we don't as a country invest in our own, I mean, it's a sad story of events when we hear that doctors went to Cuba, or students went to Cuba, they were told that they came back, they're sitting at home and they are not able to access, a job just for them.
500 doctors without a job in KZN. This is 2 days ago because we discussed it on radio. 500.
Once health services are problematic in rural areas, there are no doctors. In the areas that I mentioned, I was told a doctor comes once a month. And I'm thinking to myself, but there are doctors that are sitting at home that could be employed in order to do the work. So until we are able to access all these opportunities equally as citizens of South Africa, then we are really in trouble. But the Commission is looking at that. Persons with disability, which is another focal area that I'm looking at. When somebody mentioned here the issue of age, the fact that there's disparities where that is concerned, we already have a challenge that the persons with disability are only able to access certain services at a particular age. But look at the cut-off age with regard to youth. Obviously for them, they're just trying to show their head and then they're already being cut out. So again, those are some of the laws that we need to change in order to be accommodative of persons with disability.
Let me bring in then, from your point of view, where you've said, it's again scenario planning all the time, right? So, are we in a position now that to enhance freedom and to ensure that we protect it, that they must vote, number one, but considering all the things we said about, as in all those problems that are pretty obvious, so we don't have to debate it, right? But should there be a greater call for, and maybe as part of your scenarios, a greater call for increased activism outside an election by civil society?
Yes, definitely. Because what we found is, especially around youth dislocation and alienation, already Commissioner has already mentioned that a lot of young people are feeling so disillusioned they will not vote, but also as part of the democratic dispensation, as citizens, we have a role to play beyond voting every 5 years.
And what is
we have to hold the state to account, and a constitution even provides a right to protest. If you feel that your leaders are not doing what they were supposed to be doing. Because now, as a result of this youth dislocation and alienation, it's leading to something that is becoming a new phenomenon for us as scenarios planners, because we're finding that there's an emerging key driver on a threat to internal security. And these threats seem to be external and internal. And at the same time, we have these young people that are not economically active, they're not in school, they're not in education, without a meaningful inclusion of those young people in whatever processes. When we're planning, I mean, if we were to do another, say, national plan, how meaningfully are we including young people? Because the future we're planning for is theirs. So there needs to be that space that is created so that they feel that also they have the agency to drive change in the country. So without meaningful inclusion of young people, there will always be that resentment, and that will lead to these security threats. And we will not be insulated as the elites who are maybe in this room, because if you're part of the academy or you're working and so on, you and I, we're part of the elite.
We already have a seat at the table.
We already have a seat at the table, but that's not guaranteed, because as soon as those threats emerge and there's a major rupture, none of us will be safe. So we need to think about it right now. How about youth service? You know, after school, we're talking about doctors that don't have jobs. There could be mechanisms by, the state to say, let's write something into law wherein we can have a youth service to close the gap where there's no doctors in the rural areas or not enough teachers, because we do have competent young people.
But you see, here's the point. I mean, you spoke about the right to protest, and the right, maybe you can commission the Human Rights Commission, you can commission some other organizations, like out whoever they may be, right? But I'm going to suggest, and I don't have the numbers, but I wouldn't be wrong in suggesting there's probably like 500 mini protests taking place in the country every single day. Now, even if, and I'd like someone to correct me, I don't know how far off that mark, okay? But here's the point. If there's that many, on the one hand it suggests, you see, look at our level of activism. When we find a problem, we protest, and the fact that we have 500, that's remarkable. That's a great sign of freedom and democracy. But the flip side of that is that the fact that we can have 500 protests every day suggests it's not working. Because if it was working, then the different political parties, from the ruling party to the other parties, those in coalition as well, they would avoid protests. I mean, which political leader wants a protest? So they would actually be proactive. So I'm suggesting that as much as the protests magnify the problem, they are acts of desperation, and they do not elicit an immediate response. In fact, they're not working, although they're important.
They're not working, but they're not working because the leadership is not listening to the people. And by the time it gets to violent protests, there's a book or a report that it's called The Smoke That Calls. For the leadership to listen, they will see something burning. But it should not get to that. If the leadership was listening to the people, then there would be no need to protest. So we have to vary that, because, as you're saying, it's an act of desperation.
How do we get the leaders to listen? When I say listen, as in take action. So if we get 10, I mean, I was in Mangaung a few years ago, I couldn't believe the numbers of potholes. It was frightening, but not just there. Going to Kruger Park, you see, I mean, wherever, right? So we still talk about it, which actually means it's not being solved. So besides protesting, how do we actually get them to take action?
They have to be included. Where they're starting from planning. So we have all these marvelous plans, but you find that they are created in rooms where the elite have access. But those people from those communities are not involved. Next thing they see a community arts center being built. Meanwhile, the community wants the potholes to be dealt with, or the one holes. So that's so if we start from the beginning when we're planning, we have to be inclusive of the most marginalized, and the most vulnerable. If you are a young black woman in a rural area, that's the most vulnerable. That's the bottom of the food chain. So how do we ensure that those people are not in beyond planning, in implementation of those plans? How do we execute? And there's a lot of talent amongst young people as well.
I have no doubt about that.
Use of technology and so on, but they're not included in all those processes.
Let me bring in elegancy for Manjula. So, how, I mean, for when you sit, you're part of social cohesion. You want to plug people together. I would suggest that perhaps we need to almost ring fence one community at a time, and every community needs to, partner with business and civil society and other leaders to get that community right and put pressure on the governments of the day, right? But to extend that conversation to social cohesion that works. Because one thing is saying you're a social cohesion advocate, and so what?
You know, Ashraf, I think the main challenge was that. I think we're off.
Just see, let's just hold up the mics here so we.
Okay.
No, maybe you've got the other mic on that side. You can borrow it.
I've got both, Ashraf.
No.
They're off.
So we have no voice now. Voice or the
No
voice.
voice,
It's
no
a huge
voice.
problem. Let's see. Level, can you just try and assist on this side? Let me remind from the audience point of view. So we've probably got about 10 minutes. Maybe this time have three questions. So the first three people that want to ask questions, just raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. Okay, there's 2 on that side. Level, you check it out. Are you counting? Right. So there's 2 there, right? Is there a third person? There's a third person on this side here. So level 1, 2, 3, right? Is your mic working now?
Yes, Ashraf.
All right. So after the mic, we'll get to you guys quickly. Right? Go ahead.
Ashraf, what I wanted to say is that public participation is very important, as Tolero was saying. But to bring business, they were part of the social compacting, social cohesion first summit, from churches to political parties. But we have this deficit of people, when they don't make money out of something, people move away. And I think that's where we have got this problem that we had an apartheid debt after 1994. I don't know how many young people know here that we had to service apartheid debt. As we were talking about reparations, what was worrying was that we had to deal with apartheid debt, which we have never created. That was a burden for the state. And as we talk about RDP, I was thinking of also that the RDP was also not an RDP house. It was a plan. And now we're talking about reconstruction and development plan. And now we have NDP, which also we have to go beyond it. We have Agenda 2063. We have IDP. So to build communities, as our social cohesion program has been also responding to challenges, whether it's what happened in 2021 with insurrections or public protests, Afrophobia, taxi violence, all those challenges that we face in this country. Social cohesion comes in as a reminder.
At community level.
At the community level.
Communities of interest, yeah.
Community level, but you are just raising an alarm, you are just raising a reminder.
Yeah,
I think public participation of our communities, it is very important, from IDP level to public community meetings. Even when they call on radios and TV, the sense of responsibility must be there, Ashraf. Rights goes along with responsibilities.
Okay, there we are. Well, I'll tell you what, I certainly, and those of you who follow the work that I do know, I feel strongly about building a champion nation, not just South Africa, but a champion nation where everything works, right? And I mean, that's an ideal where the UN says the champion nation of the world is South Africa. We're far away from that, okay? Something has to give. I would think to do that, you need to say, build champion communities to build a champion nation. But who's going to do that? Who is doing that? I certainly want to know. So here's the plan. We've only got about 4 minutes before news time. So I'm going to ask the 3 of you if you can be very brief, like maximum about 40 seconds. Don't give commentary. If you can just give a question. And then if you wish to address it to a person in particular, tell us who. I'll take all 3 in one go, then we'll get a response. If you don't mind, please. Time's against us. Right, go ahead.
Certainly, I don't want to make a question. I want to speak a bit.
All right, go ahead, but be brief, please.
We cannot afford, when we talk about 30 years before democracy, just to pretend this is South Africa started 30 years ago. It's very critical of us to go back. Everybody in this country expects that in 30 years everything should have been attended to. It cannot be when we've been under 350 years of this rule of colonialism and nobody speaks about it. And one speaker there did mention the fact that there are these other people who don't want to, to do their part. We must call a spade a spade. It's what people. Black people have always tried their best in terms of forgiving. But when it comes to social cohesion, they haven't really been coming to the party in terms of making sure that this democracy works. So in short, I'm trying to say that, please, it's very critical for us as we speak 30 years. We then focus at what are the gains of this past 30 years. But then we cannot miss to inform people to say this country never started 30 years ago. So whatever problems we have right now, it's still going to take another 50 years to eradicate the poverty and everything that was done wrong by colonialism in our country.
Point well taken, and I think also linked to that, besides the hundreds of years before the 30 years, is the fact that we do have a democratically elected party in power and what are they doing? And I think we have to just put a question mark on that. Just a point, though. Right, let's get to your comment, the second one, very quickly. Yeah.
It's going to be a comment. My name is Kaya. They call me Kaya, the so super cool South African. Love my country. And listening to what's happening here, it's so one-sided. It's too negative. Giving a gloomy picture about South Africa. May you, for somehow, because only 4 minutes, in 4 minutes, the rest, it was negative. The research, that was, it was potholes and all that. May we come up with something else that we can celebrate as a country.
Okay, now, you're right, we need to turn this around. We need to turn it around, but the question is how. Maybe you have the answers, right? Right, let's get the third of those comments and we'll see if we can get comment balloon after the news. Yeah, go ahead quickly.
Oh, hello everyone, Siana Mandoras from Base University. My question is, what concrete measures have been taken to ensure that the youth is not only involved in commemorative events, but also empowered to take action and participate in shaping the future of our country?
Okay, point taken. Ownership, I think, has to reside amongst the brightest minds of the country, which happens to be the youngest people in the country. Absolutely. So here we are. It's 5:30. We're going to cross to the news. Then there's sport, then there's finance. Then we'll have 5 minutes for you guys to respond. Then we'll get the minister to come up once again. Right, so 5:30, news headlines.
Digital roadmap to which to work while staying in South Africa will soon be able to do so from Affairs Minister Aaron Motsoaledi. Of a remote work visa as a new addition to the country's visa regime. The Electoral Court has upheld the MK Party's appeal against the IEC's decision to uphold the objections against former President Jacob Zuma being on the party's candidate list. And Hamas has thrown the latest round of Gaza ceasefire negotiations into doubt, saying Israel had failed to respond to many of its demands. A full news update coming up at 6.
Still very heavy on Pretoria is N1 South today. This is a tagging crash just out by the end for the Emirates Valley Highway. Short time ago, they were busy recovering that. It's tracked all the way back through now to from one kind of all the way down to the airport. Pretty heavy. Looks like there's one looking on the northbound side there as well. Over in the Durban area, we did not go so. We have a big hailstorm, another storm leading through the greater Durban region. There's thunder, lightning, hail, heavy hail as well, a lot of wind and a lot of rain as well. So just drive very carefully. It's not essential to be out and about at the moment through Durban. That's probably a good idea. Not to be. Stay indoors, stay safe. The roads are all gridlocking pretty heavily. Particularly the M3 outbound from sort of Tollgate Ridge territory all the way through Paradise Valley on the M13. So you might have that fine count M13 likely back both ways. Cape Town today, a lot of traffic congestion around the Green Point area, between sort of the stadium and the CBD. Routes like Sunset Lane, high level, the Helen Susan route coming into town is very heavy. And lots of holdups on the N1 both in and out, heavily congested to the links to the M5 south as the Kuberg interchange. Rob Burke is second traffic.
This is SABC Sports with Dumi Kabeli.
The South African carrier captain Amanda Kamiku says that it's going to be a tougher game for Banyana to bounce back against Nigeria. Now, Banyana have to overturn the 1-0 deficit to the Super Falcons to seal a place at the 2024 Olympic Games. And he says that it's likely to be a psychological battle, knowing that the Super Falcons have an upper hand. However, she is confident in Banyana and the whole game kicks off at 7:30. And if you're still looking to go to the game, you don't have tickets, you can buy those tickets at Loftus Stadium. Students producing their student cards can go in for free, and there's also free train rides. And there's also buses from Park Station, and they will be covered until after the game also. There's some Champions League action to look forward to, and UEFA still says that this week's Champions League quarterfinal ties will go ahead as scheduled amid an alleged terror threat. Arsenal host Bayern Munich at Emirates Stadium in the first leg of the last 8 clash tonight. while Manchester City are also in action away to Real Madrid. Then the Rugby Club World Cup, where the best Northern and Southern Hemisphere club sides will compete against each other, is set to be launched in 2028. Now, the top 8 sides from the European Rugby Championships Cup, including the South African teams, as well as 6 Super Rugby teams plus 2 others, likely from Japan, will compete in the competition. A 2028 start date will mean that the tournament will be played in years following the Rugby World Cup and in between British and Irish Lion tours, which also occurs every 4 years. The note is a wrap from my side for now. For SAFM Sport, in a video.
Economic news on SAFM. Facts and figures you can count on.
Right, welcome back, and what we'll do now for the next few minutes, in fact, before we get to finance, we're going to do that in a second or two, then we're going to get the panelists to wrap up, right? But let's talk finance now. There's a big show coming out at 6 o'clock, of course, but to set the scene for that and other financial news, we're going to do that right away. Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to see if we've got the connection there. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can go ahead. You can go ahead. I just lost connection for a second. Go ahead.
On the show today, we're taking a look at the latest Africa's Pulse report from the World Bank. We're going to be digging into that with Chief Economist for the African region at the World Bank. We're going to also be taking a look at the increased price of cocoa. It's been affecting the price of coffee around the world and the price of chocolates. And then we're going to be taking a look at the most valuable brands in South Africa in the latest Brands 100 survey that has come out from that perspective. And then we've also got a conversation taking a look at the infrastructure where it relates to telecommunications providers and their towers infrastructures. A lot of the businesses have sold out their towers infrastructures and are moving towards mobile virtual network operator status, and we're going to be seeing how that affects our local ecosystem, as well as the introduction of 2 new MVNOs. But before we get to that, the markets have had a good day on the equities front, and Henk Clear has been keeping an eye on those markets for us throughout the day. He joins me now to just do a quick summary of those markets. Good afternoon, Henk. Thanks always for keeping an eye on the markets. The Rand finally breaking below 18 Rand 50.
Yes, Jimmy. What a wonderful day. I'd like to say hi to you, Jimmy. Hello, Ashraf, and good evening to all the listeners. Yes, locally, the stocks did very well, but unfortunately not overseas. It's interesting to see that US markets are quite down at the moment, with the Dow Jones and the S&P 500 losing about 0.5% at the States, and the Nasdaq trading 0.3% weaker. Similar story on European markets, where the FTSE 100 in London lost 0.2% today, then the DAX in Germany finished 1.3% weaker, and the CAC 40 in France lost 1% today. But fortunately not the same story here by us, because the JSE gained 0.2% today and finished at a higher level of 75,487 points. The resources index also did well, 1.5% stronger. The financial index gained 0.8%. But that industrial index lost out a bit today and it finished 1% weaker. Anglo had another great day, finishing 2.5% up, followed by Standard Bank, which gained 2.2%, and Glencore and BHP each finished 1.5% stronger, but Naspers and Prosus hand in hand finished the day 1.5% weaker. Another company that lost out today, Pick n Pay, as seems to be the story these last couple of weeks and months, finishing 3% down. And we also see Montauk and the Life Healthcare Group, those 2 companies, they lost 1.8%, and Total and Media Fund finished 1.5% weaker. On the positive side of things, Barlow and Northern finished the day 5% up, Farm gained 4.5%, and Zara and Sibanye still with each finished 4% stronger. On the commodities market, the price of gold currently $2,355 an ounce, platinum is $980, and palladium $1,075. The price of Brent crude now sitting at $90.35 a barrel, and the Rand really had a great day. It strengthened by about 1%. to the US dollar on average today. At some stage it was trading at 18 rand 40, 18 rand 42, now 18 rand 49 to the US dollar, then 23 rand 40 to the pound, 20 rand and 5 cents to the euro, 12 rand 30 to the Australian dollar. Bitcoin is pulling back a little bit today, trading a little bit weaker at a level of $68,500. That is 1.3 million rand, but still very high. Jimmy, that's how the markets performed today.
Thank you so much for that update, Henku. We'll be digging into some of the major market movements throughout the day in our show just after 6 p.m. Lots to look forward to there. But for now, Ashraf, back to you and the team.
Thanks, Jimmy. Certainly looking forward to your show at 6 o'clock. No question about that. Right, so this is what we're going to do. We've got about 5 minutes with the panelists here, just roughly. And then we're going to get Minister Koba to come up on stage and respond to some of the points that were raised as well. But the points that we had from the audience so far, 3. One talked about the fact that South Africa was not born in 30 years ago. The problems existed long before that. The other one was where we find a sense of positivity amongst the obvious gloom. And the last one, effectively saying, how do we get a seat at the table for South Africa's youth, not just this table, but at the absolute levers of power, and I completely concur with that. Well, I'll leave it to the panelists. I mean, who wants to pick up on which one? Just raise your hands. Anyone? Yeah, you go on.
Thanks. I'll start. I think number one on history, because I do love history, especially deep history. When this democracy was imagined, there was a very good plan, the RDP, which was included some of those things that dealt with, atrocities of the past and also correcting the economy, because as we know, our economy was eroded. However, those got abandoned. With each new administration, a new plan comes along. There's GISA and now there's NDP. And then we forget about those things that also entailed healing of ourselves, because we are a deeply traumatized nation. And that's how we find ourselves in this dire scenario. And by the way, when coming now to the narrative, how do we revisit even the TRC recommendations? How do we compel business to pay back? Because there has to be that correction, but we still don't have political will to hold big business to account so that they can ensure that they also come to the party. Now, on the narrative being negative, I mean, we are researchers.
I think reparations need to be paid to South Africa. And why it never happened just boggles my mind.
It has to do with leadership, and that's why I'm saying the political will to be courageous enough to hold these big companies and also these countries all around the world that supported the process of our trauma. And then in terms of the story being negative, we've been tracking this stuff over the years using Stats SA data, barometers, lots of other data sets that are there, and unfortunately, that's where we find ourselves. We can't continue celebrating the Constitution being the best in the world or our freedom of speech. When you look at the data, you can see the lives of the majority of South Africans are actually, the South Africans who go to bed without food. 70% of our youth are unemployed.
And you say that's difficult to celebrate. Right?
There are things that we're celebrating. Ashraf, we did speak about our Constitution and how wonderful it is, and we cannot throw that out, with the dirty water. It is something that we need to continue and maybe even use that Constitution to correct these things, or maybe revisit those plans that were abandoned. But it's unfortunate that the data is there. It shows how people are living. The Commissioner spoke to even about the most basic service, water. Us unable to provide clean drinking water for our people. When you talk about young people, I think also the leadership, again, it goes to leadership, to have the courage to pass on the baton. Because we've got this gatekeeping that exists, and that's why we're leaving young people behind. And prior to that happening, we need to have an honest conversation wherein the older generation, myself included, can also listen to the cries of young people who are, for example, put forward critiques of this very Constitution that we're celebrating, or the transition itself, how we transitioned in 1994. We heard that during the Feast Poll that young people were challenging process, CODESA and so on. And we need to be courageous enough to understand and hear, but also how do we listen to the poor in the townships who, when they try to raise certain issues, there's this labeling of these protesters, the service delivery protesters, the xenophobic attacks, and so on, without getting to the core of these socio-economic issues. So when people rise up, they are being xenophobic, without really listening to what the fundamental issues are.
Yeah, I think it's a point well made. Let me bring in Commissioner Namaklubi, just respond.
Yeah, I would like to respond to the young men from VETS, particularly as a commission. We have champions of human rights, so our programs goes to the school and where we then raise these young people. We have realized that most of them don't even know about the commission and let alone about human rights. So that's where we decided we'll start. And it is in line with our mandate being promotion of human rights. So we are partnering with the civil society. We are making sure that we raise a lot of these champions in communities, in schools, so that way, when you teach about human rights, now it also assists us to achieve a lot of other rights and that are also encompassed in the Constitution. So for us, that is where we need to start. Education, you know, and I must just say to the gentleman there, one needs to take stock. One can never shy away from, you know, mentioning these things. And that's why as a commission, we are saying we call out all those things that are wrong in an effort to assist in rectifying all these problems. Not that we don't see the goodness that has been done. I mean, some of us, you know, and as I was talking to my co-panelists, saying we are before, can I say before technology? So we know what we talk about when we talk about the apartheid. You know, when the minister there spoke about, you come to a place where you find that it says non-white, not allowed. That is the truth. And some of you young people don't even know that that was the situation for us. We were at varsities and we had to look at how our male students
I'm going to push you, right? 30 seconds.
And a lot of things that were happening right in front of our eyes. So yes, we must celebrate where we are as a country. 30 years later, really strides have been made. But again, let us try and assist those. As my co-panelist said, there are people that sleep hungry every night, entire family, sometimes the entire community. So we need to change the narrative. And it is going to take, as the advocate here said, it's going to take all of us working together. And this is what I've seen at Swahili, where the community has taken it upon themselves to have, gardens, you know, and not small scale, large, you know, in order for them to feed them, the entire community from there. So it's going to take some of those projects that will take us out of this misery. But of course, we need to bring, the investors so that we can have, like Baberi, industrial area. It is dilapidated.
Can I stop you there? Only because I need to get...
And Sarankua. Thank you so much.
Final point, if you want 10 seconds, there's a final point.
Yeah. Just saying, there are a number of industrial areas that have now gone to waste. The communities are taking those, resources that are there to use in their individual homes. They were never meant for them. They were supposed to assist the entire communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Right, so as we get to Advocate Mantula, 1 minute, I'll therefore invite Minister Zizikova to come onto the podium, and then you can respond to this. We have about 10-12 minutes thereafter to wrap up the show. So you've got about a minute to respond. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashraf. I wanted to say on the youth programs, it is important that the national days, you don't just attend them, but there are many innovatives now. You've got sports, people having the fun walk in the morning. So there are many activities that are coming on the national days. It is no longer sloganeering and rallies. There are many innovatives that are being brought in terms of dealing. The youth exchange programs, the youth camps are very important. So in short, Ashraf, I will say to you, we should not only focus at higher education, but also basic education on social cohesion. And that's where the issues of sports, arts and culture becomes that glue that unites this country and the whole continent.
And you said that I was told at the Brand SA event that I attended about a year ago, that from the South African, in fact, the head of H&M, the group, she's from Ireland, she said, South Africa's great, unique selling point is the innovation among South Africa's youth. She said, I'm sorry, the big problem with our country is you guys don't believe enough in the bright sparks and the innovative talent coming from you. Just look at them, I see, which I think is really important. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes, roughly to 6 o'clock, Mr. Rukwan, and yeah, if you wish to, I'll leave it up to you. You can say whatever. If you want to take further questions, it's also up to you. It depends on your time, so you can manage this stuff.
No, thanks very much, Ashraf. I think the questions have been answered by the panel. And I think thanks very much, firstly, for a lovely debate and your panelists. We have made very significant contribution to what is the beginning of the 13-month series of the debate in the country. Because I think what also lacks in South Africa is the lack of conversation among ourselves. And therefore it opens an assumption from one group or one individual that your thinking is better than the other people. But I think one notion that we must always remind ourselves, Ashraf and your listeners, is the notion of a nation. It's only in our constitution of 1996 which calls upon us to build a nation of all South Africans. So the idea of a nation never existed before. And there are elements, significant moments that define a nation. From the arts and sports, arts and culture point of view, for an example, there's significant moments such as played by sport, arts and culture. We have seen what our national teams have done recently. I mentioned national teams before because as I live here, I will join Banyana at Doctors, and I'll call on all of us to join them and wish them well to proceed to Paris. But importantly, we must celebrate significant moments that define us as a nation, one of which is a national flag. If you see what defines us as a people in South Africa, we are united around the issue of a flag. We are united around the national anthem. We only have one national anthem. And you must see all South Africans across the way we sing our national anthem. And these are the important milestones which define a country, and which define this notion of a nation. The right to vote is not just a right or enough. It's important that you must understand the manifesto of a party, because a right to vote and the constitution, therefore, any party, any leader that wins election must give expression to the constitution. Failure to give expression to the constitution, it will result to some of the issues that your panelists are raising. People protesting, people just electing leaders on the basis of emotions, people electing leaders on the basis of populism and rhetoric that we see. But it's important that people must elect leaders on the basis that truly they will give expression to the constitution. The constitution which says in the preamble, building a nation South Africa, which is united and that people belongs to all of it. We are dealing with a 30 years that is expected to deal with everything that has been done to our country of 345 years or more of colonialism. Siana, I like the point you're making. The only empowerment among young people is youth activism, is to be involved. And only in that way you'll be able to get this conversation. I think this conversation, abstract, the way I understand it, it must go below this level. We must go to community halls. We must go to every community to talk about what this notion of a nation means, and what are the challenges. The weakness of any, or the strength of any leadership is not to hide difficulties and challenges to the people you lead. Sometimes our leadership, we tend to hide and pretend that challenges do not exist. We cannot run away from the current challenges. The current challenges are challenges of leadership. In most areas, you find the absence of elected leadership, which was elected on the basis of competence by our people. We must go back and accept where we have not been able to give what we promised to our people. We must not hide challenges. We must not hide difficulties to the people. That we promise the following, but not able to do the following. And I think the right to vote, if all people decide not to vote, it must never be an option. Because an option to vote is always a right that was denied for many years. So I call upon all South Africans to practice their right, to exercise their right to vote, but elect people who know that they give expression to the will and aspirations of a particular community. As I thank you, Ashfaq, I think let's take this many services to our communities, to universities, because 30 years must be a celebration, not of government, not of the governing party, of all South Africans. Because it is only true South Africans that brought about this freedom. A South African who's in villages, who's in towns, who's in urban areas, must be part of the 30 years. We must give them a voice. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Well, here's an interesting one, Mr. We said 10 minutes, and you gave us 5 minutes. Now, if we can, now I'm not going to say that's over-promising and under-delivering. I'm going to suggest, if we can escalate projects like that, we promise them we'll finish it in 10 years and we'll do it in 5 years, we're on the way to becoming a champion nation, so absolutely that's fantastic. But perhaps since we've got 3-4 minutes left, if I can indulge you on this point here. Now, I've said that I speak often about building a champion nation, not just a nation, but a champion nation. And one of the things that I felt strongly about that's missing from our dialogue, if you ask people who succeed, they often talk about find your purpose, right? If you find your purpose, you'll find a journey and a map or a GPS in terms of reaching and achieving their purpose. But what's absent from finding your purpose as individuals is the national purpose. So I ask people here, what's your personal purpose? And people give their opinions what it is. And then I ask all of you, including the panelists, to say, so what is South Africa's national purpose right now? And I think they would struggle. And I'll say, let me give you an example. In the late 80s, our national purpose was end apartheid. It was clear, simple lines, end apartheid. 94, nation building and reconciliation. 2006 onwards, it was 2010 World Cup. We all knew that. If you ask me now, what's our national purpose? I don't know. If someone says end corruption, I don't think that's a national purpose, because a national purpose must be an aspiration. Any corruption is correction. So my question to you in the 3-4 minutes we got left, what do you think about the absence of national purpose in our conversations?
Having achieved what we've achieved, Ashfaq, I think it's important to say our national common humanity today must be that of building equal society. Appreciating all the difficulties and the mistakes and the shortcomings in achieving and addressing socioeconomic disparities. I think our aspiration is that of building equal society. But what we must avoid, and I think it's a debate, there's a notion of a dependency to the state. When we introduce 350, for an example, as part of alienation, there's this notion that everything else, I will wait what the state can deliver for me. And we must be careful about that. Because we're not building a welfare state that only gives houses, gives NSFAS, gives everything, and people themselves are not innovative. I think we've got to manage that, because I think in some circles, what brings about populism and rhetoric is this notion of a state that delivers everything to its community. And our state has no capacity to deliver everything to the people. Once we are building an equal society, at the same time we must build human capacity, skills for people themselves, by themselves.
But therefore, very quickly, if I can interject you, we've got 2 minutes to go. How then do we link? I heard what you said about equality, and we all agree with you. But what's the catch? How do we link? Well, 2 things here. How do we create a sense of purpose for everyone? How do we create a sense of absolute pride in our country outside the pockets of brilliance, like the Springboks, and we get a Grammy Award winner? Those are pockets of brilliance, and they all fall in your portfolio, by the way. I get that, right? But how do we extend it to medicine, to academia, across the board? And then how do we link personal purpose to national purpose? How do we align each one of these young people here, how do we get them to align what they believe in personally to a greater national cause? You've got about a minute to answer that.
No, what I can give you as the best answer is patriotism first and foremost. Yes. Patriotism to believe in your country. Because many of us, we don't have a second home.
Okay, but how do we engender patriotism from people who are naturally skeptical?
What we engender is what we do. Some of us were in leadership. We must give an expression and aspiration to those whom we lead, that this is their country. We mustn't do things that at the end people may not give hope and confidence to the people. People must give confidence and hope that this is their country, and the leadership that is elected will live through nothing else but the constitution of the Republic of South Africa.
That's a good way to leave it. Thank you very much for your time, Minister Zilikoba. Also, I want to just thank the panelists, the three panelists we had, Advocate Sipho Matula, Mr. Kolewa, Kashe Katia, and Commissioner Mamaklubi Quinana, all three of you. And certainly a thank you to the department and the Department of Sports together, from sports and arts and culture, together with SF in terms of this collaboration, right? And maybe this is the best, and of course the entire production team for SAFM that put this all together. I think it's really important. But as we wrap up and we understand the needs to be a greater cause or purpose of what we have to do, right? I mean, I want to just say this much, and it's a personal anecdote here, right? Often I get asked to do some work abroad, and I do, right? But in terms of living abroad, like permanently, here's the point. The pleasure of doing something in the name under my country's flag, it beats any other national thrill that I've got. And I'd like that for each one of you to take to your home to say, you and your flag next to each other achieve great things for yourself and for your country. That is a great, great thrill and step one to becoming a champion nation. Goodbye and good night. And to the audience nationwide on SAFM, we couldn't take the voice, so there's not much time, but love to engage with you further. We'll do it again tomorrow. Coming up next, of course, is the business show from MyWeb. But first up, the news just gone 6 o'clock. Okay, we're done. Thank you very much to all of you that were off there. Much appreciated. I wish we had more time to engage. There just never is enough time. Thank you so much.
Yeah,